The betrayal on Veronine. The wind howled over the broken land of Veronine. Red sand danced in the air like ghosts of fallen soldiers. The sky above was dark and heavy, filled with smoke and ash from the never-ending war. On this dead world, something was about to happen that would change everything. Princess Lixa stood tall on a metal ridge, her armor shining like black glass. Her golden eyes scanned the battlefield. All around her, fires burned, and the screams of dying men echoed in the distance. The war between humans and Varens had lasted too long. Blood had painted the ground red. She held a plasma rifle in her hands, warm, heavy, and deadly. Her mission was simple: find and kill the last human soldier on Veronine. His name was Captain Jace Rennick, a man the Varens called the Ghost. He had destroyed fleets, escaped traps, and survived ambushes that should have killed 10 men. But today, Lixa would finish what her army could not. She moved slowly through the ruins of a crashed human ship. Metal groaned under her boots. The smell of burning oil and blood filled her nose. She paused near a body. It was a human soldier, dead, face covered in dust. But it wasn't Jace. She knew he was still out there. Suddenly, a movement caught her eye. She turned sharply. A shadow moved behind a pile of debris. She raised her rifle and ran. Lixa leaped over broken walls and ducked under twisted steel beams. Her heart beat fast. Her senses were sharp. And then she saw him. Captain Jace stood at the edge of a cliff, his back to her, wounded and weak. His arm was bleeding, and he looked like he could fall at any moment. Lixa raised her rifle slowly. This was her moment. "You've run far enough, human," she said, her voice calm but cold. Jace didn't turn around. "You came all this way to kill me?" he asked quietly. "Yes," Lixa replied. "It is the only way to end this war." He laughed, but it was not a happy laugh. It was tired, hollow. Lixa aimed carefully. She pulled the trigger. A flash of blue light shot from the rifle. The killing shot. But just as it fired, she heard a voice behind her. "You're too late." Her eyes widened in shock. She turned around fast. Captain Jace was standing behind her. The man she had just shot at, the one near the cliff, was a hologram. Lixa's heart stopped for a second. Her body froze. She had been tricked. Before she could react, Jace grabbed her arm and twisted the rifle out of her hands. She moved fast, trying to fight back, but he was faster. He pushed her to the ground and pointed the rifle at her. For the first time in a long time, Lixa felt fear. Jace looked down at her, breathing hard. His face was dirty, eyes tired but sharp. "You're not the only one who can hunt," he said. "I've been watching you." Lixa's mind raced. How had he done this? How long had he been following her? "Why didn't you kill me?" she asked. Jace hesitated. For a second, his grip on the rifle loosened. "Because maybe you're not like the others," he said. "Maybe you're not the monster they made you." Lixa blinked. No one had ever said that to her. Jace slowly backed away, still pointing the gun. "This war is a lie," he said. "And soon, you'll see it too." Then, just like that, he vanished into the shadows, leaving Lixa alone with her thoughts. She sat there on the ground, heart pounding, the words replaying in her head. This war is a lie. She looked up at the stars, wondering for the first time. What if he was right? The shadow that walks among aliens. The lights inside the Varen command dome flickered with a cold blue glow. The air was thick with tension, and even the walls seemed to hum with suspicion. Princess Lixa walked through the long metallic hallways with a blank face, but inside her, confusion stormed like thunder. She had failed to kill the last human. Worse, he had tricked her. He had been behind her while she fired at a fake. No one else knew, yet. Outside, the sky of Veronine cracked with distant lightning. Sandstorms danced like devils in the wastelands. Warships floated in the distance, guarding the cities like silent giants. Inside the command room, High General Vorn awaited her report. "You were gone too long," he said sharply. His eyes were cold slits behind his silver helmet. "Did you find the ghost?" Lixa clenched her fists behind her back. She could hear Jace's words in her head. "This war is a lie." "I saw nothing," she lied, keeping her voice flat. "Just ruins and dead bodies." Vorn studied her, his face unreadable. "Strange. A human distress signal was received last night. Coordinates not far from your location." Lixa's jaw tightened. So the humans were still sending signals. That meant Jace wasn't just hiding. He was planning something. "I'll investigate again," she said quickly. "No, you won't." Vorn snapped. "You will stay here." That was not a request. As Lixa left the room, she knew something was wrong. The Varen High Command was hiding something. From her, from everyone. And now she was being watched. Meanwhile, Captain Jace Rennick crouched silently in the shadows of a burned-out reactor tower. His suit was black, blending perfectly with the night. He didn't move. He barely breathed. Below him, a squad of Varen soldiers marched through the ruins. They were searching, scanning every corner. Jace had been watching them for hours. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was hunting. The Varens thought they had control, but they had made a mistake. They had underestimated what one human could do when pushed too far. Jace tapped a small device on his wrist. A red light blinked. A camera drone, hidden near the entrance of the command dome, began recording. He zoomed in and saw her, Princess Lixa, walking out of the building alone, her face tense. "She's starting to doubt them," Jace whispered to himself. He had seen it in her eyes when he spared her life. She wasn't like the others. Something inside her had cracked open. And Jace knew that crack could bring the whole empire down. Back at the command dome, Lixa entered her private chamber and locked the door. She activated her personal scanner and began checking her armor. It was standard protocol after missions, but this time she had a different reason. She found it. A tiny chip embedded near her shoulder plate. A tracking device. Her own army was tracking her movements. They didn't trust her anymore. She ripped it out and crushed it under her boot. Her heartbeat quickened. She wasn't just hunting a human now. She was caught in something deeper. Something that smelled like betrayal. She opened her data console and began scanning through secret logs. Her royal status allowed access to certain restricted files. And then she found it. A message from the Varen Ag Command, dated 3 weeks ago. Subject: Jace Rennick. Order: do not kill. Reason: capture for experimentation. Her eyes widened. They never wanted her to kill him. They wanted him alive. So why send her with a plasma rifle and a kill order? Unless they were testing her. Suddenly, a sharp pain exploded in her head. Images flashed across her vision, not her memories, but someone else's. She collapsed to the floor, shaking. Her mind filled with voices, human voices, children laughing, a woman crying, a soldier shouting. She had triggered something, a memory download, a hidden connection. And then she heard his voice again. "Jace, still think I'm your enemy, princess." Hours later, the Varen squad returned to their base, but something was wrong. One of them was missing. Private Cora, the youngest of the group, had wandered off during patrol. They found his helmet lying on the ground, and a message burned into the wall beside it. "He walks among you." The soldiers looked at each other nervously. Fear crept into their bones. The humans were supposed to be gone, beaten, dead. But now, there was talk of a shadow moving through their camps, leaving no footprints, stealing weapons, watching them. They gave him a name. The Ghost That Walks, and he was already too close. Final scene. Lixa stood on the tower rooftop, staring into the storm. Behind her, someone stepped out of the shadows. She spun around, but there was no one. Only a voice in the wind. "You're not like them. You just don't know it yet." She clutched her weapon tighter. Something was changing inside her. Not just thoughts. Not just doubt. Something in her blood. Something human. A mind link gone wrong. The silence in the Varen lab was not normal. It was too quiet, like the walls were holding their breath. Princess Lixa stood in the center of the cold chamber. Her black armor had been removed, replaced with a silver suit that allowed her to safely enter the mindlink pod. The room smelled like burnt wires and metal dust. Above her, wires hung like vines from the ceiling, blinking with soft blue lights. Across from her, a human prisoner sat inside a glass pod. He was young, maybe 20, with short brown hair and frightened eyes. His name was Private Ellis, one of the few humans captured alive. This was her new mission now. Not to fight, but to connect. The Varen scientists believed that mind-linking with humans could help them understand why Jace Rennick had survived so long. They thought she, the warrior princess, could pull secrets from this prisoner's memories. They didn't tell her how dangerous it might be. Lixa stared at the human boy. He avoided her gaze. She didn't blame him. After all, to him, she was the enemy. "Begin the link," the scientist said coldly. Lixa closed her eyes and placed her hands on the mindlink panel. The machine buzzed. A sharp electric pulse shot through her skin, then her brain. Colors exploded behind her eyelids. For a moment, everything felt like falling into water. Then, silence. And then, voices. She was no longer in the lab. She stood on a grassy field, under a blue sky. Children were playing nearby. A woman sat under a tree, smiling. Lixa blinked. This was a memory. She turned and saw Private Ellis, much younger, running toward the woman. She called him my brave boy and hugged him. Lixa felt something strange. Her heart tightened, a warmth in her chest. Not fear, not pain, but something softer. Love? She shook her head. This is just data, she told herself. It's not real. But then the scene changed. Explosions, screaming, smoke. Ellis's memory now showed a battlefield. His mother was gone. Soldiers ran past him. A tall figure stood in the distance. Jace Rennick. Lixa watched as Jace lifted Ellis from rubble, carried him to safety, and gave him water. His face was younger here, but still calm and brave. Lixa stepped closer to the memory version of Jace. Suddenly, he turned to her. This wasn't part of the memory. This was him. "Why are you in his mind, Lixa?" Jace asked. She froze. "How do you know my name?" she asked. "You're not just watching this. You're connected now," he said. "You opened the door, but you don't know what's on the other side." Suddenly, pain tore through her skull. The memory around her shattered like glass. Screams filled her ears. She dropped to her knees, gasping. The scientist's voice came from far away. "Abort. Abort the link." Too late. Her body convulsed. Her heart raced. Blood dripped from her nose. But something inside her had changed. Later that night, Lixa sat alone in her quarters, staring at her hands. They were shaking. She had never felt this way before. She wasn't just tired. She was afraid. Not of Jace, not of war, but of something deep inside her, something she had never known was there. Empathy. The mind link hadn't just shown her human memories. It had unlocked her own. Flashes came at random. A human child holding her finger. A woman's voice calling her by another name. A burning lab. Screams. A metal door slamming shut. And then, darkness. She walked to the mirror and stared at her reflection. Her golden eyes seemed different now, like they no longer belonged to a pure Varen. "What am I?" she whispered. Suddenly, the mirror blinked. A projection flickered to life. It was Jace, not in real time. A recorded message. Her hand trembled as she tapped it. Jace's voice filled the room. If you're watching this, it means the link worked. You're not just part of their army. You're part of something else. They made you forget. They made you kill. But the truth is in your blood, Lixa. You were never one of them. And I never wanted to be your enemy. Tears welled up in Lixa's eyes. Varens didn't cry. They were taught to control emotion. But now, she couldn't stop it. All this time, she thought she was a warrior made to destroy. But now, a new thought entered her heart, soft, small, and powerful. What if I was made to protect? Final scene. Alarms blared across the command dome. Another human rebel camp had gone dark. Varen soldiers panicked. He's close, one of them whispered. He's inside the city. But no one saw him, because the shadow walked with silence. And as Lixa looked out her window into the stormy night, she no longer feared him. She wanted to find him, not to fight, but to understand who she truly was. The human rebellion begins. Veronine was not silent anymore. From beneath its cracked surface, deep in the forgotten tunnels and abandoned cities, something was rising. Not machines, not monsters. Humans. The ones who had survived the war. The ones who had hidden in the shadows. The ones who were supposed to be dead. But they were not dead. They were waiting. Jace Rennick walked slowly through the old metro station. The lights had stopped working years ago, and vines had crept in through the cracks. Dust covered the floor, and broken screens flickered with static. Behind him followed a small group, men and women dressed in torn clothes, some with missing limbs, others carrying makeshift weapons. They had once been soldiers. Now, they were survivors. And Jace, he was their leader. He stopped at an old map on the wall. It showed the entire underground of Veronine. Tunnels, vent systems, abandoned labs. Here, Jace said, pointing to a red circle. The energy core. It powers the Capitol Dome. If we shut it down, we break their hold on this world. But it's guarded, a woman said. Her voice shook. They have auto guns, drones, Varen war beasts. Jace looked at her. Then we fight smarter. We don't need to defeat their army. We just need to light the fire. The group stared at him. He was tired, wounded, just one man. But something in his eyes, it gave them hope. Meanwhile, in the command dome, Lixa stood in front of the Varen High Council. A group of old generals and scientists sat behind silver walls, their faces cold and robotic. You accessed restricted files, one of them said. You mind-linked without authorization. Why? Lixa looked them in the eyes. Because you lied to me. The room froze. You told me we were fighting for peace, she continued. You told me the humans were monsters. But now I see. We're the ones who became monsters. Careful, princess, one general warned. Your words are dangerous. Lixa's hand shook, but not with fear. With rage. I saw their memories. I saw children burned alive. I saw humans running for their lives while we hunted them like animals. One scientist stood up. They were necessary sacrifices for the future. Lixa stepped closer. No, they were people. The council voted to remove her from the field. She was no longer allowed to command. She was locked in her quarters. But it was too late. Her heart had already changed, and she was no longer fighting for the Varens. That night, deep in the tunnels, Jace and his group reached the old Varen transport rails. The rebels moved fast, using old machines and hacked codes to pass undetected. One of the boys in the group, maybe 16, walked beside Jace. Is it true you faced Princess Lixa? He asked. Jace nodded. Yeah. Did you kill her? No. Why not? Jace didn't answer for a moment. Because I saw something in her eyes, like she didn't want to do this anymore, like she was lost. The boy frowned. She's still the enemy. Jace looked at him and said something strange. Sometimes the enemy doesn't know who they really are. Back in the city, Lixa broke free. With help from her loyal AI assistant, she bypassed the lockdown and escaped through a hidden service exit. She wore a hood, walked through the dark alleys, and entered the oldest part of the city, where Varen soldiers rarely went. There she found a secret message, left on a wall. A human symbol. And below it, coordinates. She recognized the style. It was Jace. He wanted her to follow. Climax. Varen patrol ambushed. Somewhere near the surface, a large Varen patrol moved through the forest zone. They had been sent to hunt down a rebel signal. Suddenly, boom! An explosion ripped through the air. From the trees, humans attacked with silent fury. They used old weapons, energy grenades, and hacked Varen tech. Within minutes, the patrol was wiped out. On one of the fallen helmets, the rebels left a message. "We are still here." The rebellion had begun. Final scene. Lixa in the shadows. Lixa stood at the edge of the rebel camp. She didn't enter. She just watched. She saw children playing with broken tech, women treating wounds, and old men carrying weapons they could barely lift. They weren't soldiers. They were families. And then, Jace stepped into view. He saw her. She saw him. They didn't speak, but something passed between their eyes. A silent understanding. She was not their enemy anymore. And the war was no longer about Varens as humans. It was about truth as lies. Enemy becomes ally. The night on Varen 9 was colder than usual. Ash fell from the sky like snow. The twin moons hung low, casting long shadows across the old steel fields where machines once stood tall. Now, everything was quiet, like the world was holding its breath. Deep in the underground ruins of Sector 7, a fire crackled gently. Around it sat tired rebels, some eating, some fixing weapons, others simply staring at the flames. Jace sat alone on a broken crate, sharpening a rusted blade. His mind wasn't on the weapon. It was on her. He had seen her near the edge of the camp, just standing there, watching. Not as a spy, not as a threat, but as something else. She had every chance to attack, but she didn't. She could have called for backup, but she didn't. He had known war for years. He could smell lies. He could sense traps. But this felt different. Suddenly, a soft crunch of gravel behind him. He turned. She was there, Princess Lixa. No armor, no weapons, just a cloak and those golden eyes that now seemed unsure, almost human. The rebels nearby reached for their guns. Jace raised a hand. "No," he said. "She's not here to fight." The others didn't understand, but they obeyed. Lixa stepped closer. Her voice was low, almost breaking. "I don't know who I am anymore." Jace stood. "You're not their puppet. That's a start." She shook her head. "They lied to me. I believed I was protecting my people, but I was just cleaning their mess." Her eyes met his. There was no fire in them now, just tired truth. "I saw your memories," she whispered, "in the mind link. I felt everything. Your pain, your anger, your love." Jace looked at her for a long time. And then he did something unexpected. He smiled, just a little. "Then maybe there's still hope for both of us." Later that night, Lixa sat beside the fire, surrounded by humans, people who should have hated her. But they didn't speak cruel words. They didn't spit or curse. They simply stared, curious, cautious. A little boy walked up and handed her a small bowl of soup. She blinked. "Why?" she asked. The boy shrugged. "You look hungry." She took the bowl with shaking hands. That one moment cracked something deep inside her, a wall built from years of training, pride, and orders. These weren't monsters. They were people. Meanwhile, at Varen command, General Vorn slammed his fist on the table. "Lixa is compromised," he growled. She accessed files. She accessed memories. Now she's disappeared. Find her. Kill her if necessary. One officer spoke up. She's still the princess. Not anymore, Vorn said coldly. She's a defect. He turned toward the AI terminal. Activate Protocol Black Echo. The AI's voice echoed through the room. Protocol Black Echo initiated. Full force authorization granted. Targets: Lixa Varen and Jace Rennick. Back at the rebel camp, Jace and Lixa sat inside a small war room, going over the map. There's a hidden power core below the city, Jace said, pointing. It controls the AI. If we destroy it, we stop everything. The drones, the satellites, the mind programs. Lixa nodded slowly. It's guarded, deep inside a vault. Biometric access only. Jace looked at her. You have access. She hesitated. I was built with it. He frowned. Built? Lixa looked down. Her voice was quiet. I'm not fully Varen. I'm not fully anything. My DNA is part human. The room fell silent. I'm a hybrid, created for war, a secret weapon. That's why they fear me now, because I'm starting to think for myself. Jace reached out and touched her hand gently. Then let's give them something real to fear. Climax scene. Escape from the sky drones. Alarms wailed. The rebel camp exploded in chaos as Varen drones descended from the skies. Dozens of them, hovering, scanning, firing. Jace shouted orders. Evacuate. Get the children underground. Lixa didn't hesitate. She leaped onto a rail pipe and used her wrist module to hack into the nearest drone. It spun wildly, then crashed into another. Boom. Jace fired his rifle, covering the retreat. Smoke filled the air. Fires burned. One drone targeted a small girl running alone. Lixa dashed forward, shielded the child with her own body, and took the blast. She hit the ground, coughing. Jace rushed to her side. You okay? She smiled weakly. I guess I'm fully human now. That hurt. Final scene. The Pact. After the battle, the rebels gathered. Some had died. Many were wounded. But they had survived, because of her. Jace stood before them all. She saved your children, he said. She fought beside us. He turned to Lixa. Will you lead this mission with me? She nodded. I was born for war, she said. But I choose peace. With you. Jace extended his hand. Lixa took it. The fire behind them burned bright, lighting their faces. For the first time in Vera 9's history, a human and a Varen stood together. Not as enemies, but as allies. The final programmed betrayal. The wind screamed across the broken rooftops of the Varen capital. From above, the city looked like a maze of glass and steel veins, once proud, now decaying. Towers blinked red with emergency lights. Giant screens flashed war alerts. Sirens wailed in the distance. Something was breaking. Not just the system, but the lies that held it together. And tonight, the truth would rise. In the depths below, Jace and Lixa moved quickly through the tunnels beneath the Varen AI core. Old walls leaked mist. Lights flickered. Every step forward was a step deeper into danger. Behind them, a small team of rebels followed, armed with explosives, EMP bombs, and hope. Just ahead, Lixa said, checking her scanner. The vault is protected by biometric lock and voice command. Jace nodded. You'll get us in. She hesitated. What's wrong? He asked. Lixa looked him in the eye. There's something I didn't tell you. He stopped walking. Tell me now. She looked away. Her voice was barely a whisper. I was made to kill you. Flashback. Years ago. In a hidden lab, a group of Varen scientists stood around a large chamber. Inside floated a young girl, barely 6 years old, wired to machines, eyes closed. That girl was Lixa. On a screen, Jace's image appeared. His file, his DNA, his face. "This is the target," the voice said. "She will grow up with one purpose: to find him, track him, and destroy him." They added something to her brain, a program hidden behind her thoughts, a sleeping order waiting to wake. She won't know, not until the moment comes. Present moment. Jace stepped back, shocked. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I thought it was gone," Lixa said. "I thought I had broken free." Jace looked at her hands, shaking. Her breathing quickened. Her pupils narrowed. "Lixa," he said carefully, "what's happening now?" She collapsed to her knees, screaming. The program activates. A sound echoed through the tunnel. A frequency, silent to humans, but sharp as a knife to Lixa's ears. Her head pounded. Her mind turned red. She heard a voice inside her brain. "Target located. Mission: eliminate." Her muscles moved on their own. Her hand reached for her plasma blade. Her eyes locked onto Jace. "No," she gasped. "No, I don't want this." Jace stepped closer. "Fight it, Lixa." Her arm raised. The blade hummed. Her body shook violently as she screamed. "Kill him. Kill him. Kill him." But then, Jace did the impossible. He dropped his weapon and stepped closer. "You're not a machine," he said. "You're not their tool. You saved children. You protected people. You chose peace." He placed her blade into her own hands. "If you want to kill me, do it." Lixa stared at him, tears streaming down her face, hands trembling. And then, with a final scream, she turned the blade on herself. But Jace moved faster. He grabbed her arm, twisted the blade free, and pulled her into an embrace. She collapsed into him, shaking. The program failed, because her heart had changed. Later, in the AI core, Lixa stood before the AI gate. Her hand glowed as she placed it on the scanner. "Access granted," the machine said. The gate opened, revealing the core, floating above a pit of pure energy. Screens flickered to life. The AI spoke in a calm, robotic tone. "Princess Lixa, you were not supposed to resist." She stared at the core. "You took my memories. You used me. Correction. We created you." Jace stepped forward. "Then it's time to destroy you." The AI laughed. "If you kill me, the city collapses. The satellites crash. Millions die." Lixa looked at Jace. "Do we risk it?" He nodded. "Freedom is always worth the risk." The final betrayal. As they armed the explosives, a figure appeared. General Vorn. His face twisted in anger. "You were our finest weapon," he growled at Lixa. "And now you side with a ghost." "You lied to me," she said. "You made me think I had no choice. But I do." She raised her gun. Vorn laughed. "You still don't get it, do you? Jace isn't just your target. He's your trigger." He held up a remote. "I can activate the kill command manually." Lixa's body jolted again, her hand raised against her will. But this time, Jace was ready. He moved faster than Vorn expected. He grabbed the remote and smashed it. Then, he disappeared behind Vorn, just like the first time they met. Vorn turned. Too late. Boom. Jace struck him down with one clean blow. Lixa fell to her knees, free once more. "You okay?" Jace asked. She looked up at him, eyes full of something new. Peace. Final scene. The core melts. The explosives activated. Jace and Lixa ran. Behind them, the core began to collapse. Flames exploded. The AI screamed. The lies burned. And as they escaped into the tunnels, smoke rising behind them, they knew the war was ending, because the final betrayal had failed. And the future now belonged to those who chose it. The shot that changed the galaxy. The sun rose over Vera 9 for the first time in years. Real sunlight, not filtered through clouds of smoke or the glow of war machines. The AI core was gone. The towers were silent. The skies no longer buzzed with drones. But peace was not quiet. It was filled with sound. Children laughing. Birds returning. Wounded rebels being helped from underground shelters. And in the middle of the broken city stood two figures, side by side. Jace Rennick, the human ghost, and Lixa Varen, the weapon who chose not to kill. 2 days earlier, the escape from the AI facility had cost them. Half the tunnels collapsed. Some rebels were buried alive. Jace's left shoulder had been dislocated. And Lixa, she had passed out from the energy backlash. Her internal circuits had shorted when the AI tried to override her again. She lay unconscious for hours. But when she opened her eyes, she saw something new. Hope. She saw humans building shelters for Varen orphans. She saw rebels carrying wounded soldiers, both human and Varen. She saw a world changing. But peace was not free. Not everyone wanted the war to end. From orbit, one last Varen battlecruiser watched the planet. Its captain, an old warrior named Krell, refused to believe Lixa had turned. "She's corrupted," he told his crew. "A broken creation. We end this now." He loaded a particle cannon, enough to wipe out the rebel zone. He sent one final message to the surface. "This is your warning. Turn over Lixa Varen, or this world burns." The last stand. Jace stood on a high tower with a long-range transmitter. He answered Krell's message. "You want her," he said. "Come and get her." Lixa stepped beside him. "No," she whispered. "He's after me. I'll go." Jace turned to her. "No, we end this together." With the rebel engineers' help, they found a solution. A prototype rail cannon buried in an old base, just strong enough to pierce a starship's shield. If aimed perfectly, only one person could make that shot. Lixa. Because her brain was still wired to Varen tech, her fingers trembled as she stood before the cannon. The memories flooded in. All her life, she had been trained to kill Jace. Now she was aiming to save him. And everyone else. The final shot. High above, the Varen ship charged its weapon. Countdown. 10 seconds. On the ground, Lixa locked onto the ship's weak spot, a small vent beneath the cannon arm. Jace stood beside her. "You can do this," he said. Her eyes filled with tears. "I was never meant to save anything." He touched her cheek. "You're not what you were meant to be. You're what you chose to be." She pulled the trigger. The cannon hummed, louder than thunder. A blue beam shot upward, slicing the sky. Silence. Then, boom. The Varen ship exploded in the air, turning into 1,000 burning pieces. Cheers erupted across the rebel zone. People screamed with joy. They had won. Because she chose to shoot the sky, not her enemy. But the price. The cannon exploded from the overload. The blast threw Lixa backward. She hit the ground hard, smoke rising from her body. Jace ran to her side. Her skin sparked. Her heart was slowing. Her voice weak. I didn't want to die. But if I had to." "Don't talk," Jace whispered. She smiled. "I just wanted to feel human." He held her in his arms. "You are. You always were." 1 week later, across the galaxy, news spread. Varen weapon saves humans. The Ghost and the Princess end the war. First peace treaty signed on Varen. Humans and Varens gathered in one place. They held hands. They shared food. They buried their dead together. A statue was built in the center of the rebel city. 2 figures stood side by side. One in armor, one in human uniform. A plaque at the bottom read, "She was made for war. He was trained to survive." But together, they chose peace. Final scene. Jace walked through the new garden growing where the AI core once stood. A child ran past him, laughing. He looked up at the sky. No ships, no bombs, just sunlight. Then he heard a voice behind him. Soft, familiar. I hear you still cry when you cut onions. He turned around. Lixa, alive, smiling. She wore no armor now, just simple clothes, human eyes, a warm heart. He laughed and hugged her. How? He asked. She touched her chest. Someone rebuilt me, she said, but left out all the killing code. Jace smiled. Good, because from now on, he looked around at the peaceful world. You build, you grow, you live.